welcome to Widowed Too Soon. This is Michelle Bader Ebersole. Unfortunately, Mark is not here with me today, but in just a minute, I'll introduce you to our special guest, which I'm so excited about you guys getting to know. Real quick, let's see. I'll catch up with what happened in the last week. You heard all about graduation last week, and then it's felt like we've just been recovering since then. I can't even remember what we did this past week. All the kids were home, school's out. We did a graduation party yesterday for Haley, so it feels like, whew, the last thing is done. And it was great. She had tons of friends and family come, and we made this cute photo booth thing, and I made her like take pictures with everybody, and it was just a fun time, and it was just fun celebrating her. And then I gave her a special gift. I gave her one of Luke's old Bibles. I did that with Hayden on his graduation, and then I had given Peyton one for his birthday, and she had been asking me, when do I get one? So yesterday she got to unwrap the Bible from him, and that was really special. She's like, I love this. And so I was glad that I have enough of Luke's Bibles to give to all of the kids, so they now all have one. And we just had a fun day. Whoops, silence your phone. I should be doing that. I always tell Mark that. Anyways, we just had a fun time with friends and family. And honestly, I can't remember a lot. It's just like the last week is kind of a blur, like settling into now it's summer. I met with my personal trainer for the first time. That was awesome. You know, she taught me, I think I talked about this in the last podcast I did. The personal trainer before taught me a lot about how after age 30, women lose like half a pound of muscle a year. And so we really need to be lifting weights. So I did my first session. It was awesome. And then I do it on my own 2 more times, and then I see her. And so that's been something new. I've been very, very sore, but it's been an awesome experience. And I don't even have anything really exciting. And it's, you know, Mark's not here to talk about all these things. So, they did ask that you keep Mark in your prayers. Remember, I shared last week his post, and I don't think there's been a post since then, or I haven't seen one, just about he's, you know, feeling a lot of anxiety, and, you know, recovering from a stroke is a really hard thing. So they ask, and I'll pray for them at the end, that we will keep Mark in our prayers, and Tina and the kids. And so I'm sure he'll be back as soon as he can. So I think that's all I'm going to say, because I really don't have a lot of stuff that happened in the last week, and it's just not fun by myself. Oh, I did want to say thank you for all the positive feedback. You know, last week I didn't even know if I was going to do an episode, and then God gave me the whole thing about being persistent as a widow, and I got so many like messages and texts and everything about how that really helped you. So thank you for letting me know, because sometimes, especially when I'm all by myself recording, I'm like, is this doing any good? And so it was nice to know that it actually was helping people. So we're going to dive right in today, because this might be a big episode. So I am sitting here with my new friend, Jim Tilson. Did I say it correctly? Tilson?
Yep.
Is that right? Or Tilson?
That's right. Tilson. Yes.
Tilson. Yes. And Jim recently filled out the form that he would like to be a guest, and we have a much harder time finding widower guests. And I was very excited when I read his story. I mean, not excited because he's been through a lot of stuff, but just excited for you guys to hear his wisdom and what he's been through. So this is going to be really organic. I haven't even gotten to know Jim yet, so I'll be asking questions and getting to know him right along with you guys. So all right. Oh, wait, let me talk about one more thing. I forgot. So today is Father's Day, so thank you for being here on a really hard day. And I wanted to mention really quick, I did have grief today. This is like our 5th Father's Day without Luke, but I woke up just my heart breaking for my kids. And I just started looking through like old videos, and I found a video of him doing something special with each one of the kids. Like there's one where he's singing You're My Sunshine with Haley when she's like 2 years old. There's one of him playing with Peyton in the park when he's like 1. And then when Hayden's like 5 and he's taught him to ride a bike. And I posted all these videos and just said, and I was crying this morning, and I just said, you know, missing, my heart's breaking for my kids today, and missing the hands-on dad. And then when I was driving, so Peyton's learning, that's another thing that happened this last week. Peyton is learning to drive Luke's truck. So Peyton's 16, still has his permit, and he's been driving it this week. He really loves driving it. So he's driving me back from lunch today, and he goes, yeah, that Instagram video hit me hard. And it was the video I'd posted of him and his dad. And he's like, yeah, just the way he was playing with me in the park. And I was like, yeah, that's all right to feel sad. And just kind of, he was open about his grief. And so I wanted to make sure he knew that was good. Like, you know what? It's okay to feel it. I cried this morning. We feel it and then we move forward, but it's okay to feel it. And it is hard. And he was like, yeah, everybody's stories is all about Happy Father's Day to their dad. And I was like, you could post a story to your dad in heaven. Like I do that. So I think he might do that. So anyways, just wanted to say that little side note. So Jim, does Father's Day bring up grief for you?
Today was really a good day.
Oh, good.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love my kids.
Yeah.
And it's not been a huge grief. I think the harder one to navigate has been Mother's Day.
Yeah.
Just because,
Mm-hmm.
Tracy is not here.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I'm very grateful for is my kid's godmother lives right here in Oak Ridge,
Oh.
and she's a member at our church. And they have a close relationship with her. And 2.5 years ago, after Tracy died, when we were coming up on her birthday and on Mother's Day, which are back to back, it was the first time.
Wow.
And I asked the kids, for Mother's Day, do you want me to invite Aunt A, Adrienne, their godmother, to come over and have dinner with us and spend time?
Mm-hmm.
And both of them were just immediately, yes, we want her to come over.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've done this the last 2 years. On Mother's Day, their godmother comes over and we have dinner together and they spend time with her. And
That's great.
that is really good to have that maternal figure in their lives.
Yes.
I mean, she's not their mom, but she's their godmother and they're very close to her.
Right.
So that's a real blessing right there.
That is awesome. And how old are your kids?
My daughter is 19. My son is
Okay.
17. We have all our birthdays together. So
Oh,
we're
wow.
in one billing cycle, as a friend jokingly put it. So my wife's was first, beginning of May, then my daughter, then my son, and then my birthday is tomorrow.
Oh, happy
So
birthday.
thank you.
That's
Thank you.
awesome. So let's get to know you. Let's start way back in the beginning. Tell us about how you met your first wife. Like what was that like and your story with her?
Okay. So my first wife, her name was Melinda Johnson. We met in school at UT. We were both
Okay.
majoring in computer science. And the night that we met, it was January of 1988. And we were enrolled together in a class, although we didn't know it. I was meeting up with a friend of mine at his dorm to walk over to class together, and he said, "Can we wait a few minutes? There's someone else who's also going to be in the class walking over with us." And a few minutes later, Melinda came off the elevators, and that was the first time that I got to meet her.
Wow.
So yeah, we got to be very good friends during that spring at UT. Over the summer, we went separate ways. I had a study trip to Germany. She had a summer job, and then she had one more semester at school that fall before she graduated and moved away. And I had another 1.5 years of school, and I moved to a different state. But all through the next 8 years, we stayed in touch. We talked by phone quite a bit.
Back
She
before
worked-
FaceTime.
Yeah, that was back before FaceTime. I think email. I mean, a few people had modems at home, but
Yeah,
it wasn't really
right.
common. So it was phone calls and cards and letters and that sort of thing. We tried dating a time or two, and it just didn't really quite click. Circumstances, different
Yeah.
states, etc. I worked for a couple of years in Alabama. And then I left for seminary in 92. I was in a Protestant denomination at the time and went to seminary for 3 years. Part of my training, I had to do hospital chaplaincy. So summer
Oh,
of
wow.
93, I managed to get on at Duke Medical Center in Raleigh. And so I was just 20, 30 minutes away from Melinda. She was living in the Raleigh
Okay.
area, working for IBM at the time. And that summer, or late that spring, her mother died in a car accident. So
Oh no.
I came to the Raleigh area just a month after her mother's death, and was there that summer doing hospital chaplaincy, but also we had time together just to hang out and be friends. And went to the beach a couple of times. I have family who live there, so it was a chance for her to get out of town and have a weekend just to get away from it all. So over the next couple of years, I finished seminary. She finished her job there in North Carolina, moved back to East Tennessee. When I graduated from seminary, I moved back to East Tennessee and was posted to a church just 2 miles away from her house. So
Wow.
the day after I was ordained a deacon, she came by my apartment with a gift of banana bread. And that was
Nice.
mainly a cover. It was if she lost her nerve, she would have just said, "Here, banana bread," and left.
Right.
But we talked about it, and that was when she told me that she had decided that while I was in seminary, I was hands off, that she was not going to distract me or derail me from pursuing ordination. But now that I was ordained a deacon, on the track toward priesthood, I was serving in a church, did we want to try dating? And yeah, absolutely. As of that moment, we were dating. So a
Sweet.
couple months later, we got engaged. We had known each other almost 8 years at this point. So
Okay.
a lot of our friends, people at the church, thought that this was awful whirlwind. And in reality, this had been years in the making.
Right.
So we married in January. So yeah. We got married. We had our honeymoon in Scotland. Wonderful time. Came back to the States. I served for a couple of years. But during that time, I started having this sense that I wasn't in the right place. And the more I prayed about it and wrestled with it, I just came to this growing sense that where I really needed to be was Eastern Orthodoxy. And when I finally raised it to Melinda, her answer was very simply, I don't know anything about it. I didn't go through seminary with you. I don't have church history and theology, but I've watched you wrestle with this. I've watched you pray about it. I believe you've heard from the Lord, so you need to be obedient, and I'm your wife, so I need to go where you go. So do what you need to do, and I'll follow and pick it up as we go. So that began the journey. We left where we were and started attending the Greek church for a few months in Knoxville. About that time, there was the beginnings of a small Orthodox mission church in the Knoxville Oak Ridge area. So we got involved with that. April of '98 was when we were confirmed in the Orthodox Church. We had to go over to South Carolina because we didn't have a priest here yet. So we went to the church in Columbia. We were confirmed together since at the time I was a layperson, now no longer serving in an ordained capacity. I got a job going back to software development. I had a training session in Atlanta scheduled for that week following Orthodox Easter after our confirmation, or chrismation, as we call it in the Orthodox Church.
Okay.
So that Sunday afternoon after Easter, Melinda drove back to Knoxville. I drove to Atlanta and started my week worth of training. And on Wednesday evening, I got back to my hotel room after doing my laundry, and the message light was flashing on the phone in my room. I picked it up, and it was Melinda's aunt, and very simply, she said, "Jim, you need to call me at this number," and that was it. But from the message, I made the intuitive jump. I knew that Melinda had died. Afterwards, thinking through it, I realized had it been anyone else in the family, Melinda would have been the one to call me. And
Right.
thinking about her aunt's voice on the phone was so flat. I realized thinking about it later, had Melinda still been alive, there would have been tension. There would have been something there, but it was just the flatness and the control in her voice that I knew. I just knew that Melinda had died. So I got a hold of Pam, and the number was for the hospital in Oak Ridge. Melinda had been in a car accident on her way home from work and had been killed instantly. Yeah.
Wow.
So I handed over my car keys to a colleague of mine who was there in Atlanta with me so that he could drive my car home later. I got a flight from Atlanta back to Knoxville, and then began the whirlwind of planning the funeral and everything that needed to be done. Thursday, the very next day, the priest at the Greek church in Knoxville called me, said, y'all are a tiny mission. You've only just rented a warehouse space. You don't have anything in it. You're not set up to do a funeral. Do the funeral here at St. George. He was very kind, very hospitable. And then, as part of the conversation, he said, "You're so new to Orthodoxy. You wouldn't know this, but it's pious custom. It's not doctrine. It's not dogma, but just pious custom is Orthodox Christians almost never die during Bright Week, that week after Easter. That those who do are considered specially blessed. That it's like, there is no judgment. The books aren't even opened. They're in paradise. They've made confession. They've received communion at Easter. This is the feast of the resurrection." So the Orthodox Bright Week funeral is a totally different service than the usual Orthodox funeral. It is all the hymns of Easter. It's all resurrection. It's all hope. It's all the joy that we have in Christ's resurrection. So Melinda's funeral was at St. George. I remember sitting in the front pew and doing the best I could to sing music that was brand new to me. Right. Just trying to get a feel for the tune. And the two priests who were doing her funeral, one of them was the priest who had chrismated us the week before.
Wow.
I think between the two of them, one of them had ever done a Bright Week funeral before. So we were going through the funeral in fits and starts because they were trying to feel their way forward because it was not the funeral service they were used to doing. Wow. So, yeah, that's kind of a nutshell. Marrying Melinda and our coming to Orthodoxy and her funeral. But for me, because of how that happened, being Orthodox and the hope that I have in Christ and the joy that I found in this fullness of Christianity is so tied up. Her death is so tied up in this hope of the resurrection. And that's just colored how it's been for the last 26 years. It was 1998 that she died.
Oh, wow.
Melinda died a few months before Google was a thing. So as a young widower, there was almost nothing online.
No resources.
Exactly.
Sure.
Maybe a few online bulletin boards and a few static HTML pages.
Static HTML,
and that was about it.
Wow.
I went to the bookstore, and the books on grief was maybe about 2 shelves, and 99% of the books were aimed at women age 65 and above.
Yeah.
There was almost nothing for a 29-year-old man.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I found one book. I still have it on my shelf, and it's one that I would recommend if it's still in print. It's called "I'm Grieving as Fast as I Can," and it is directed at young widows and widowers.
Wow.
So that's one I would throw out there if it's, as I say, if it's still in print.
So wow, this is so I didn't know your story, so I didn't know what was coming and how she died. So you said goodbye, went different ways, and then you heard from a phone call that she had passed away. What was that like for you? I mean, such a shock. You're so young. You just said goodbye to her. I mean, just kind of walk us through like those first, I don't know, few days, weeks. Like what did life feel like?
Oh Lord. I got the phone call and I thought I was going to throw up. I mean, just to put it bluntly, I mean, it's just the stomach churning and the nausea. And then it was, okay, I've got to get packed. I've got to make arrangements to get back home. I've got to notify X, Y, and Z. I've got to make these phone calls. So I made a couple of phone calls, got a cab to the airport, got on the plane, made phone calls on the plane. Friends picked me up at the airport in Knoxville. My godfather, who was the first priest at St. Anne's, Father Stephen Freeman, picked me up at the airport. He and his wife put me up for the night. Just all the funeral home arrangements, everything that needed to be done. And then once you get past the funeral, so it feels like you're stepping outside of time for those few days because you're not going to work. You've got to deal with all these questions, everything that's got to get settled. You've got to write checks. You've got to just everything that goes into doing a funeral, combined with the prayers that we had. So in Orthodoxy, one of the common practices when someone dies is the church keeps vigil and reads the Psalms, starting at Psalm 1,
Oh, wow.
going through to Psalm 150, and then back to Psalm 1, and just keep vigil until the funeral.
Oh, wow.
We had a few families who had been Orthodox for years, but we also had people who were brand new to Orthodoxy as well in the mission that just signed up and kept the rotation going and prayed the Psalms for those 3 days after Melinda died until the funeral on the Saturday. So we had the funeral on the 9th day after someone dies, and also on the 40th day, we get together and we have memorial prayers. We also share a meal, and there's a special food. It's a dish called koliva that we make. It is usually made with wheat berries, or if you live in a part of the world that wheat is not as common, it could be made with rice. But it comes from, in the Gospel of John, when Jesus said that unless a grain of wheat is buried, dies and is buried, it remains alone. But if it's buried, it brings forth much fruit. And so this is a dish that's made with wheat berries that we remember Jesus's words about the resurrection. And it's made with honey, could be with dried fruit. Some people might add parsley or some other bitter herb to also symbolize the bitterness of grief. But it's blessed during the memorial service, during the prayers that we pray, and then shared among all the people that are there. So it's a food that we have at times of funerals. So we had prayers on the 9th day, we had prayers on the 40th day, and then we got going with, we had this mission church, let's get it started. And a month or two into that, Father Stephen called me and said, we need a choir. I need a choir director. So
oh, wow.
Could you do this? So I agreed. Okay, we need to do this. Let's do it. We do all our music a cappella in the Orthodox Church.
Oh, wow.
So that was also a learning curve for me, getting a 4-part choir going. All of us learning music that we didn't know. But it was a joy to be able to lead the choir, and one or two guys came alongside as well. So it wasn't just me. We had a couple other choir directors, and one fellow in particular, Mark, his mother directed the choir as he was growing up. So she was sending music every week, and he was burning up the Xerox machine, getting all the music together for the services. So I had a congregation that was absolutely wonderful. We had 25 of us when we started out, and our pastor was not yet ordained to the priesthood for about 9 months or so, almost a year after we had gotten started. But everyone was so supportive, and it also, in a weird way, Melinda's death galvanized the mission. I mean, it was one of those of God taking something absolutely horrible and being able to bring something good out of it. I mean, it doesn't change the fact her death was horrible.
Right.
But the day after her funeral, 10 people enrolled as catechumens at St. Anne's who said, we're ready to make the commitment. We want to be chrismated. We want to become Orthodox Christians, because you never know what's going to happen. You never know when it may be your time. And so, as I say, God really galvanized the beginnings of St. Anne's with Melinda's death. And the congregation was so supportive. Everyone was just so wonderful.
It
during that time.
sounds like you had a great, the congregation and this church and the choir gave you a purpose and something to keep going. So how did you get through? There were not very many resources, like you said.
No.
There's no podcast. There's no Google. What? How did you get through that? Let's say the first year. Because we have a lot of new widows that listen to us. And so I always like to get back to, if you can remember, what got you through that first year?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I would have to say my employer was fantastic. They gave me the space that I needed to grieve. And my church was such a huge support, and especially Father Stephen and his family. We did choir practice on Thursday evenings, and they invited me to just come have dinner at their home every Thursday night before choir practice. So having that time, Father Stephen at the time was working in hospice chaplaincy, because St. Anne's was not yet to the point that we were able to provide a stipend for him to support him and his family. So he was working as a hospice chaplain at a local hospital, but really, really good pastor. And he and his wife and their kids just took me in, took me into their family and really supported me through that time. And my own family, my parents live about 100 miles away. But my own family and friends were very supportive during that time. I remember, that the first of everything, the first Christmas,
Oh, yeah.
the first birthday,
So
the first anniversary, the first of everything. And you just kind of, I learned, it's sort of, if you ever been to the beach and a huge wave is coming, you can either be bowled over, or sometimes what I like to do is just dive straight into the wave. Because if you point yourself into it perpendicular and dive in, it doesn't hit as hard, and
True.
it can actually be kind of
good.
fun. It's like, you think you're going to get me. No, I'm taking you head on. So the very first Christmas, I called my parents and said, you know what? I've never hosted Christmas at my house. It's always been go to family. I really don't want to do that this year. How about, would y'all like to come down and stay with me for Christmas?
Nice.
So my parents came.
Change it up.
We had Christmas at my house. I roasted a duck. I had never had duck before in my life, but I thought, this sounds like something fun to try. So totally, I went into it knowing it's not going to be the same. So if it's not going to be the same, how about I make some intentional changes so that I feel like I have a little, I don't know if control is the word I'm looking for, but I'm coming into this and I'm making some choices about it. And I'm taking some initiative, and I'm not going to let it just roll over me and be difficult.
So good.
So
That's so good.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's good advice, because it is going to be different, and a lot of people listening have not been through all the firsts before.
Yeah.
And it is, that's what I did. I said, do something different. Like, I didn't want to do the same. So we did different traditions and different things. Because I tried one thing like that was usually the same. I think it was going to the pumpkin patch with my kids, and it was horrible because it was like Luke's presence was missed so much. But then we tried for Thanksgiving, instead of doing our normal stuff, we went to Great Wolf Lodge and went on water slides, and it felt better because it wasn't the same thing. And so I think that's such great advice.
Absolutely.
So there's so much more to your story. So I want to talk about, so what happened? So you get through that first year or however long. I know at some point you meet your next wife. So could you tell us about like what life was like in between and how you met her and all of that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So during that time, I was really wrestling. So in Orthodoxy, a priest can be married one time. We do have married clergy, unlike in Roman Catholicism, where priests and bishops are celibate. Roman Catholic deacons are able to marry. But in Orthodoxy, a priest or a deacon can be married one time. And even if you're widowed, if you remarry, that's an impediment to ordination. And I was, before Melinda died, I was thinking that I would pursue ordination as an Orthodox priest. After she died, I was still seriously thinking that was what I was going to be doing. But I knew that I could either be ordained or I could get married again, but I couldn't do both.
Right.
So I took time. I didn't rush into either one. I knew whatever I do, as long as I haven't made a decision, I still have both options open. But once I make a choice, I've made my choice. So I went about 5 years planning to be ordained, thinking about this is what I'm going to do. I'm not going to get married again. And it was after 5 years that I came to realize that just for the welfare of my soul, what I needed to do was get married again.
You were still really young too.
Oh yeah. I was in my early 30s. One of the biggest realizations I had. So as I mentioned, there were a couple of us directing choir at St. Anne's, and we took it in turns. We rotated duties, but I always directed the choir at the weddings. And I realized after a couple of years, the reason I was doing that, by directing the choir, I could have my back to what was going on, and I could just focus on the music in a technical sense, just the logistics of, okay, what's the next thing we've got to sing? I've got to give pitches to the choir. Are we on track? Are we doing this right? That I could kind of tune out what was going on. And I realized, wait a minute, if I've got this kind of bitterness, what kind of priest would I be if I approach weddings with this kind of bitterness in my soul?
Right.
That this is just, I really don't think I should be pursuing ordination. I probably should look at getting married again. And when I raised it with Father Stephen, I remember that conversation so clearly. He said, absolutely, Jim, that is the right choice, but I couldn't have told you that. You had to come to that yourself. It was one of those, you had to figure it out yourself. No one needed to be telling you that. And so it was shortly after I had come to that point. I had just changed jobs, was working over in Knoxville, and that was when I met Tracy. She was one of the trainers at Team Health at the company that I was working at. I was doing software development. She trained the users in how to use the software that we wrote. And as part of my orientation, after I'd been there a month or two, it was go through all the training so that I knew what the software was supposed to be doing. And I was there the day that Tracy was training the payroll module of our software. She handed around her business card and said, hi, this is my name. I'm Tracy Carlene. However, as of Friday, scratch out the name and write in Castleberry because she was in the throes or finishing up a very difficult divorce. Had gone through a rough time. So we met August. I knew her name. She knew my name. And then we didn't see each other again until December at a company Christmas luncheon, and got there late, and the only seats that were still available, there were just two or three together. So we ended up sitting next to each other and got to chatting about music. I mentioned that I directed the choir at church and also was singing in the chorus with the Oak Ridge Symphony and Chorus. And we had a Christmas program coming up, and she was singing, had started attending a Methodist church in Knoxville, was singing in the choir there and ringing handbells. So we got to talking about music and things that we liked. And out of that, ended up swapping CDs. And then friends of ours set us up going to the opera together. Oh, nice. So our first time to the opera was La Boheme. If you've ever seen the movie Moonstruck with Cher and Nicolas Cage,
I know what you're talking about, but I've never seen it.
Okay, a lot of listeners have. If you've ever seen it, La Boheme is the opera they go to see at the Met. So it's a very romantic, very sappy, sweet Puccini opera. But we had a marvelous time. Started going to the opera together, started dating, and something in me that had, when Melinda and I were dating, I always knew Melinda and I could be married. There's just something in me said, this is one to marry. Yep. And after I met Tracy, she was the only other person that I'd ever felt that instinct say, marry this one. So I didn't wait 8 years. We dated a few months, and all of her friends seemed relieved when they met me. It was so funny. Within the first 60 seconds, over and over, every time, I could see this relaxation in their face, like, nice. Oh, thank heavens, he is not like her ex-husband.
Right.
I never met him. He was European. He moved back to Europe after they separated. But I just over and over saw this reaction of, he's a totally different guy than the one she used to be married to. So we got engaged on my birthday. How could she say no, right?
Right.
Maybe that was, well, we already knew we were going to be getting engaged. It wasn't, the only surprise was the fact that I asked her on that day. Right. We had already been talking about maybe getting married. So we got married October of 2003 here in Knoxville, and had a wonderful honeymoon in Montreal. Tracy was fluent in French. She had lived in Paris for 8 or 9 years, taught English as second language. I have a little bit of high school French, so I can get by. I can order a meal. I can reserve a hotel room. I can do the basics. But she was absolutely fluent. I laugh with the kids about don't ever use the French that you learned from Mama when she was watching World Cup soccer.
Oh, funny.
That was the colorful French.
Yeah.
Yeah, the few words I know that I wouldn't use, I learned during soccer games.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, so we married in 2003, and our daughter came along about a year and a half after that, and then our son 2 years later. And Tracy was a stay-at-home mom after our son was born, but we were both very active at St. Anne's, especially with Christian education, taught Sunday school, vacation church school. Yeah. But she always wanted to get back to education. And so when our kids were teenagers, Tracy found a local college that had a remote learning program, and she was able to go back and get her teaching certificate and her master's in education, and graduated December of 2019. Wait for it. Yeah, COVID hit. And right when she was in her first year of teaching at a middle school in Knoxville. So she had her
talk about a hard first year.
Yeah, exactly. Her first semester was normal, and then she had a year and a half of trying to teach foreign language wearing a mask, where kids need to be able to see the mouth. Yeah. They need to see, how do you make these sounds? Because French makes a lot of sounds we don't make in English.
Right.
Exactly. So all of that difficulty was going on. After her 2 years at that middle school, she interviewed for and got a job at the high school here in Oak Ridge. So she got to teach with one of her best friends, who was the other French teacher at the high school. And our kids were in high school at the time. Our daughter was a junior. Our son was in his freshman year. So they passed by her classroom every day on their way back and forth between classes. And she was so thrilled to be teaching at the Oak Ridge High School.
Yeah.
February of 22, when she was only 4 or 5 months into that job teaching at the high school, it truly was in the mercies of God. I got home from my working out that Wednesday afternoon. Kids were busy. Our son was doing his homework. Our daughter was on the computer playing games with friends online. Tracy was about to throw a couple of pizzas in the oven to make dinner. We just started talking about our day. And then out of nowhere, she just grabbed the kitchen counter and said, "Something's wrong. I don't know what's going on. Something is wrong." And then complained about a severe headache. I grabbed a chair, sat her down, and she blanked out for a minute or two. Eyes were open, but I could tell she was not with it. And, a minute into this, and I realized, okay, this is a 911 call. So I immediately called 911. By this point, the kids have come into the kitchen to see what's going on. And so I told my daughter, "Here, call this phone number. This is Father Stephen. Let him know what's going on." Called my son in and said, "Okay, there'll be an ambulance coming. I need you watching," because by this time it was already after dark. "Make sure they stop at our house. They don't miss the house." By the time the ambulance arrived, she was conscious and responsive again. So they came in, took vitals, asked a few questions, asked which hospital she wanted to go to. And I could tell she was about to say, "Oh, I don't need to." And I immediately said, "No, Methodist. Let's just, here in town, let's go." So they got her on the ambulance. And the last interaction that we had, I gave her her icon of her patron saint, Saint Genevieve of Paris. She was able to walk down the front steps, aided by the paramedics. They walked her down the front steps, put her on the stretcher, took her to the ambulance. I went back into the house to pack a bag because I knew I was going to be at the hospital overnight. And I was waiting for Father Stephen's wife, my godmother, to come over and sit with the kids, because I wasn't going to just take off and leave a 16-year-old and 14-year-old at home alone when they've just watched all this going on with Mama. Yeah. They needed someone there. Yeah. So I waited until Mother Beth arrived and then headed to the hospital. And by the time I got there, Tracy was in the emergency room ICU room and was unconscious, never regained consciousness from that point on. But I sat overnight there in the emergency room just praying, God, please, not again.
Right.
She had a subarachnoid hemorrhage, basically at the base of the brain. It was an aneurysm that ruptured. We didn't even know that she had an aneurysm. The next morning, she was transported to another hospital that was set up to try to deal with the aneurysm. I met with the radiologist right before the procedure. Basically, it was going to be go in through the thigh up to the brain, inject dye, and then see the extent of it and insert a coil to try to stabilize things and deal with the aneurysm. But they were not successful. In fact, it was maybe an hour or two into it. By this time, my sister-in-law from Atlanta, my wife's sister, arrived. She's a physician specializing in pediatric oncology. But Kelly arrived. We were sitting together in the emergency room, or in the waiting room, excuse me. A nurse or somebody came out and asked us to come with her. And the moment she did, I knew, just like with Melinda, I knew that Tracy was gone. And it was afterwards, looking back and piecing it together, nobody takes you to a separate room to give you good news.
Right.
If they're taking you somewhere private, it's because they're giving you a space that you can fall apart if you're going to fall apart and not feel embarrassed or be shamed in front of people. And as soon as the doctor walked into the room, I could tell from the look on his face what his next words were going to be. So, yeah.
Wow.
About this point, Father Daniel, who is currently our priest at St. Anne's, Father Stephen retired 4 years ago. Father Daniel had arrived along with one or two of my friends. And I asked if he could hold off notifying the parish until I had a chance to tell my children, because I didn't want them to find out from anyone else.
Right.
That day, my son had gone to school because he wanted normal, just go to school. And as far as we knew that morning, she was going in for surgery, and we would see how it was going to come out. So he went to school. My daughter stayed at home because she didn't want to face school. But that meant I drove back to Oak Ridge, to the high school, kept it all together, and just said, I need to see the principal. And as soon as I got into his office and closed the door, Tracy was his first hire. He had just hired her that year to teach French. And as soon as I closed the door, told him that she didn't make it and that I needed to have Jonas brought to the office so I could take him home. So my son came to the office, and I broke the news to him there. We got home, and then I had to break the news to my daughter. So I had to do it twice.
Oh.
And as I mentioned on another podcast that I'd interviewed with, I never want to have to break my children's hearts like that ever again.
Right.
Just the having to tell them that their mother had died. So, and by this point, I was 36 hours almost without sleep. Wow. Because I'd been up all the night before, and I was still in workout clothes because I'd gotten home from the gym. I was still covered in salt from all the sweat because I'd put in an hour and a half of hardcore workout the night before. So thankfully, my sister-in-law was with me. She sat with the children. I got a shower and got fresh clothes. Went back to the hospital, and by that time, my family had arrived in Knoxville. Tracy's parents had arrived in Knoxville, so we all converged on the hospital. We do have prayers that are said at the time the soul departs from the body. And so Father Daniel and Father Stephen were both there. We were in the intensive care unit. That's where they had her because Tracy was an organ donor. So she was kept on life support until they were going to be able to retrieve the organs for donor recipients. And I asked the nurses, we have prayers that we do. Can we all go in? Just the priests and my children and me, because on both sides of our family, Tracy and I were the only ones that were Orthodox. And at first, the answer was no, because I don't know, there was COVID or because it was intensive care unit and they have restrictions as to how many people can go in. But one thing I've learned, and I'll share this with everybody, in a hospital, if you are kind and you smile and you ask the nurse politely, because nurses can take a lot of hassle from a lot of unhappy, hurting people.
Yeah.
If you are kind in how you ask for something, especially if a nurse can appeal to someone over them. And in this case, the nurses talked to an administrator and they got permission for 5 of us to be able to go into the room at once. And so Father Daniel was able to say the prayers there at her bedside. And then we took it in turns as family, all to go in to say goodbye. And then came back I brought the kids back to Oak Ridge. And on the drive over, my daughter said, could I stay the night at so-and-so's house, her best friend? And as soon as she asked that, my son piped up and asked if he could spend the night at his best friend's house. And my immediate reaction was, oh, but don't we all want to, I'm thinking, Mama just died. We need to be together as a family. And I stopped for a moment and took a breath. My daughter's friend had already cleared it with her parents, and it was all cool there. I told my son, check with your friend, have him ask his mom, and if it's okay, then it's okay by me. I'm just grateful in that moment that I stopped and I took a breath and thought about, I feel like close ranks pull the family together. What do my children need? Not dictate to them what we're going to do, but see what they need. And they're teenagers, and at this stage of life, you have teenagers, you know this, they are carving out their own identity. They have their own circle of friends. They're sorting out who they are apart from you.
Yeah.
And my kids, right then, were communicating what they needed at that point in time was they needed their friends more than they needed me in that moment. And it's not saying, Dad, we're never going to need you. It's just saying in this moment, that was what they wanted. And so we came back to the house. I said, fine, gather, get pajamas, clothes, toothbrush. Both of them said they wanted to go to school the next day. And, my hunch is it's not unusual. Kids want normal.
Yeah.
Even if it can't be normal, it's what they want. And what's normal for them is Friday, we go to school. And it was when they gathered all their stuff, and their friends lived just 10 minutes away. So I dropped them off at the respective friends' houses. And that's when I realized I've been awake for almost 48 hours. Someone is taking care of my kids. Someone will see to it that they eat in the morning. Someone will see to it they get to school. Someone will be there for them. I can go home and fall apart.
Yeah.
And it was then I realized just what a gift that was. So I got home. I shucked out of dirty clothes. I had 1 shot of whiskey in the whiskey bottle in the kitchen. So I had 1 whiskey, and I had a just let it all out, scream and cry, which I couldn't have done if the kids were here at home.
Right.
And then I went to bed, and I slept for a good solid 6-7 hours, which I desperately needed. Got up the next morning. The next morning was when they were going to be doing the test for brain death to certify, yes, she's truly gone. We can proceed with the organ donation with everything that needs to be for that. And I got up, got dressed. I was going to head to the hospital because I wanted to be there for all of that, even though I couldn't be in the room, but just be present and be able to talk with the doctor afterwards. And right when I was about to walk out the door, my phone rang, and it was a good friend of mine from over 30 years ago. We met each other when we studied in Germany together for the summer. And I picked up the call, and Hunter said, "Good morning. It is a gorgeous day in East Tennessee. The sun is coming up over I-40, and I am halfway there. I just felt like the Lord wanted me to be there for you today. Anything that you need, I am here."
Wow.
And so he arrived at the hospital, and it was awesome having Hunter there with me.
Yeah.
Just a good friend to sit with me.
Yeah.
And we had lunch and got back to the house. And he made a stop and picked up a bottle of scotch from the city in Scotland that Melinda and I had our honeymoon in. And I had since been back to Oban. And as a thank you gift, because Hunter let me park my car at his house when I flew to Scotland, I brought him back a small bottle of scotch. Well, he bought me one of the 20-year-old bottles of Oban. I mean, this is top shelf, really, really, really good scotch, just as a gift. And sat with me and my friends that evening, and was there. The night before, when I was getting the kids to the hospital, when we said our goodbyes, when I was with the family, St. Anne's got together, and just as a testimony to Tracy and how beloved she was there at church, I think word went out around 2:00 that afternoon after I'd notified the kids, and I told Father Daniel, "Okay, you can let everyone at St. Anne's know." 6:00 or 6:30 that evening, 140 people showed up at church to say the memorial prayers.
Wow.
So, yeah, and to me that was a comfort. It's like, I got to take care of my kids. I'm here with my wife. I've got to do this. I've got to do. But to know that the community was getting together and praying for her and for us at this time, it's like, even though I'm not present there, the community is coming together and is supporting our family. So, yeah, all of that. Organ donation took place on the Sunday. Tennessee Donor Services is an absolutely fantastic organization, and their representative at the hospital was so kind. And Maria was able to help me with one or two issues afterwards, working with the hospital. She helped me straighten some things out. But a part of Tennessee Donor Services, they send you a letter afterwards telling you what organs were able to be used, what kind of gift.
Wow.
And when you think about the logistics of, you've got timing, you have to have a tissue match. I mean, it's got to be, you can't just give an organ to somebody. They've got to make sure that it's going to work, that it's not going to be rejected, and so on. So, it's not unusual. You have one, maybe two organs can be used. 3 is incredible. 4 is exceptional. 5 recipients.
Wow.
Tracy's liver, each of her kidneys went to different donors. Her lungs and her heart were all, they found matches, and they found recipients, 5 for her organs. So that was just miraculous. Just an absolute miracle, the timing of all of that. And I'm so grateful that other people were able to live because of her gifts. So, let's see.
That's
Coming out of all of that,
Yeah.
get to the funeral home. I used the same funeral home that that had handled Melinda's funeral. We called St. George because it's a bigger church, and the priest there very graciously said, "Yes, you can have Tracy's funeral here at St. George." I sat in the same pew that I sat in for Melinda's funeral, just the opposite end, but I was in the same pew. We had, I want to say there were 4, 5, 6 priests that came in from out of town to assist at her funeral. Just an amazing, amazing day. The prayers, just the support that came with that. Funny story, my dad was out in the parking lot talking with one of the guys from the funeral home, a fellow in his mid-40s, who said he had only ever done one other funeral at the Greek church in Knoxville. It was when he was 19, 20 years old, just learning the family business. And as they're talking, my dad put the pieces together and realized he was talking about Melinda's funeral.
Wow.
So,
Wow.
yeah, one of those
Crazy.
crazy, it's a small world.
Yeah.
But coming out of that, Tracy and I had been married for 18 years, and that's a point in marriage where even in a good marriage, you still have stuff that you're working on. You still have
Right.
open issues. You still have things that are not resolved and not settled. And when you're parenting teenagers, especially when they're 14 and 16, you got a lot of open stuff. And so like, one of the first things I did coming out of that was I told the kids, okay, you tell me when, but we're not going to wait a long time. We're all going to counseling. We
Yeah,
are
it's
all
good.
going to get in and see a therapist because we all had someone that we had worked with on stuff in the past. For my son, unfortunately, the therapist that he had worked with before, well, I'm at the funeral home and I texted her to ask, do you have any openings? I need to bring my son in. She wrote back and said, I've had to close my practice because I was
Oh.
recently diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer and I'm on palliative care.
Oh.
And she died less than a month after that.
Oh
So
no.
I had to tell my son, okay,
Oh
you're
my
going to
goodness.
counseling and it's not going to be with Marla because Marla will be dying any day now. And yeah, I
Oh.
mean, his comment was, it's just like all over again when Mama died.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to figure, what am I going to do? And one Sunday, bless her, a member at St. Anne's came up to me and said, I don't know if this is appropriate or not, or if I'm speaking out of turn, but we take our daughter to this wonderful counselor in Knoxville. His name is Travis, and if you need his phone number, I'll give it to you. And I thought, wow, for my son to have a male counselor, a teenage boy to have a man who can talk with him about how to
Mm-hmm.
grieve. Oh, this is a godsend. Give me his phone number. And he's really clicked with this counselor. It's been
Oh,
a good
so good.
match.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, just I'm grateful for God's provision there. And while doing therapy, I also met on a regular basis with Father Daniel. And one thing I would hold out: therapy is therapy, and pastoral counseling and confession is pastoral counseling and confession. And they are two different things, but they can work well in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
A little plug for my blog site, but I did write a column, a blog post once about sometimes things may come up in counseling that you realize, wow, there's something spiritual here. I need to take this to confession. And there may be things in discussions with your pastor or making confession that you realize, I need to explore this a little bit more. Let me take this over and talk with my therapist about this, talk with a
Mm-hmm.
counselor about this. So they're not the same thing, but they work very well in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
That you can really help with the work of healing, bringing it from both sides.
Mm-hmm.
So God has provided very richly in that regard. Just a fantastic pastor, a wonderful congregation that had just jumped in and took care of my kids and me. They've known my kids ever since they were born. They've known me. I've been at St. Anne's for 26 years now, since its founding. So I'm one of the old guard, one of the original members that's still there.
And
Um,
what
so
year
I'm
was
I'm
this?
grateful for that.
I'm wondering what year she
22,
passed away. 22. Okay.
22. So it was just over 2 years ago.
Okay.
So yeah, once again went through the firsts of everything. First
Yeah.
birthday, Mother's Day,
Mm-hmm.
Christmas, anniversary, all of these things.
And this time with kids, you're going
And
through
this
all the
time with
firsts. Yeah,
kids.
which is very hard.
So yeah, I will say, there's a real blessing in going through it with kids.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I would wish this on my kids,
Right.
but the first time I was alone, and not only that, I was alone. Melinda and I were trying to start a family.
Okay.
In fact, we had conceived once, and we lost the baby just a
Mm.
couple of days after we found out we had conceived. Um, and then we kept trying, and month after month, negative pregnancy test. But it was sometime after she died that I realized, had we not lost the baby the one time we did conceive, she would have been 8 months pregnant when she died. I
Oh
mean,
my
I would have been
goodness.
burying a wife with a baby 8 months in
Oh
utero.
my
I
goodness.
mean, it just, as hard as it was to lose the baby up soon,
Yeah.
up front, and then have month after month of negative pregnancy tests. Yeah, it could have been even harder. But
Mm-hmm.
going through it with my children, and wow, it is different. People grieve. There is no schedule to grief,
Right.
really, or at least there's nothing. You can't make a schedule. It's just you're going to have a rough day when you're going to have a rough day.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to have an okay day when you're going to have an okay day. And you can't put it in the calendar in advance. And
True.
then when you're doing it with other people, your okay days may not line up with their okay days.
Mm-hmm.
And their rough days may not line up with your rough days, or they
Mm-hmm.
might line up with your rough days, in which case you really have to work at giving each other that grace that you need when you don't feel like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with kids, I mean, mine are mid to late teenagers, but kids grieve differently than adults do.
Mm-hmm.
With adults, we have this baseline. It's always there in the back of your mind. It's the grief is running there, and with kids, it tends to be they're doing their normal thing, and then suddenly a grief hiccup, and they grieve intensely, and then they come back down, and then they go back to doing their thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's been a big learning experience walking through it with my kids and seeing how do kids grieve, how do boys grieve, how do
Mm-hmm.
girls grieve, because I've
Mm-hmm.
got one of each,
Right.
and they talk about things differently and they
Yes.
handle their feelings differently, and um, learning to listen to each one of them to hear not just what they're saying, but how each one of them says the things that they're saying, and what I need to watch for and what I need to listen for. Um, yeah, it's been just learning to be intentional and to ask my kids what they need.
Yeah.
I'd read a blog post at one point, a dad who, coming up on first anniversary after his wife died, he put together all these plans of, we're going to do this for dinner, and we're going to go to the cemetery, and we're going to release balloons, and we're going to do this thing, and we're going to do that thing. And the day came, and the kids didn't want to do any of it. And the dad is trying to drag them
Mm.
through these things. He hauls the family to the cemetery, and the kids don't want to be there.
Yeah.
And he's wanting to do this for dinner, and the kids are complaining because they want to do something else. And the point of his post was, I should have asked them in advance, what do you want to do for this day?
That's good. Yeah.
And work together, because especially for dads, we get in this mindset of, okay, we got a problem. I got to come up with a
Solve it.
solution. I'm
Yep.
going to apply the solution. Okay, everyone, just shut up and let me do the dad thing.
Yeah.
And you can't do that with grief.
Right.
You can't
Oh.
do that with a family to begin with, but
Mm-hmm.
especially with grief. So, yeah, along, I've tried to talk with my kids and include them in the planning. And hey, what do we want to do about Mother's Day? What do we want to do
Yeah.
about this birthday? What are we going to do for
It's good.
Christmas? Thanksgiving, I threw it open this past year, and I'm so glad I did. My daughter is pescatarian. She decided she wanted trout and found some recipe and one or two sides that she liked. My son decided he wanted to do chicken wings. He found a recipe that he thought sounded really cool. I thought, deep frying, you've never done this before, but okay,
Yeah.
let's bring it on. Let's do it. So we each came up with a menu, and it was definitely not your standard Thanksgiving
Right.
fare. We got up Thanksgiving morning, and I thought, I'm feeling a little off, a little congested. This is just a cold. I know it's just a cold, but I'm going to take a test anyway.
Mm.
And I lit it up in like a minute and a half or so.
Mm-hmm.
The COVID test says wait 10 minutes, and it was bright red
Yeah.
in no time.
Mm-hmm.
So I went to
Bummer.
bed, and just, after one or two harsh words to myself, I just locked in my room and texted the kids and said, okay, I got the Rona. Can you handle Thanksgiving?
Oh wow.
And with teenagers, I mean, I would not have sent a 6-year-old down to deep
Right.
fry chicken wings. I would have said, son, leave them in the freezer and we'll just have to do them next week. But my kids, I was out in the hall and I heard in my daughter's room, the two of them were already talking and put their heads together. Okay, you do this, this, and this, and I'll do this and
Nice.
this. And between the two of them, they put Thanksgiving together.
Wow.
So, yeah, we've had to pull together as a team,
Yeah.
and they're doing their own things. They're teenagers.
Yes.
They have their own circle of friends. They have their own activities. They do their own thing. There are times our schedules don't mesh, and then we got to work things out. But overall, we've pulled together because we've had to.
Yeah. So hard.
One of the first things we did as soon as school was out back in 22, we have good friends in Europe, in England and in France. My wife has a godson in France, in the north of France. As soon as school was out, I figured we can either sit on the couch and sulk all summer long, or we can have something that we're going to do. Hey, kids, let's go to Europe for 5 weeks.
Wow. Amazing.
And so we took off. We started in Scotland, spent a few days at an Orthodox monastery off the west coast
Wow.
of Scotland, a couple days in Glasgow, down to the Midlands, spent a few days there in the tiny village of Tilston, where the family name comes from,
Oh.
and got to meet several people there in the village. Spent some time with friends of ours in Shrewsbury. A few days in London, saw some shows on the West End, met up with a friend in London, then took the Channel to France, spent a week with this family in France that we are very close friends with. The dad of this family, my wife was godmother to their youngest. Benoit came over to America for Tracy's funeral.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, he moved heaven and earth and made it over here for her funeral. So we spent a week with the family, had a wonderful time. Few days in Paris. The other French teacher from the high school, my wife's colleague, was in Paris at the same time.
Wow.
So it was wonderful because she knows the city. I don't know it at all. So we got to sightsee very efficiently. And then the kids and I ended it with a week in Germany. And my son's German teacher was there in Germany at the same time we
Wow.
were. So we were able to meet up and have a day. She and her husband met up with us, and we had a day hike in the Black Forest and had a marvelous time. But it was good for the kids and me to have that time together,
Yeah.
especially like in France and Germany. My kids don't speak French. My son had a little bit of high school German, but wasn't confident enough to really be able to use it. But we were able to go and have some adventures and get out of our comfort zone. But it also, we had to be a team together to make it work, really. So it was a good experience for our family
Yeah.
to be able to do that. I have a friend who, when she was widowed, she told me afterwards that she had taken her kids on a big trip after her husband died. And what it did was it helped cement that she was now the head of the household.
Yeah.
And because they were on a trip, the kids had to rely on her.
Yep.
So it really helped to reset the family relationships.
That's good. Yeah.
And I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, but afterwards realized, yeah, that was something the kids and I really benefited from, was the adventures, but also realigning or working out our relationships with each other, how that was going to work.
Yeah. So I want to go back to with this when you're widowed the second time.
Yeah.
How did you handle? I mean, because I'm married again, and that's my biggest fear.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how did you handle that? Like when you were like, not again. Like, were you ever angry at God or angry at the situation? Like, why me? Why again? Like, I feel like I would have those thoughts. Like, what was that like for you?
I wasn't really angry at God. I mean, and it's not sugarcoating anything, because death is real and death is awful and death is not something that we were created for.
Right.
But I think what really provides the framework for me, and it's going back to when Melinda died during Bright Week. and having the hope of the resurrection that we have
Yeah.
is that, and in Orthodoxy, the primary theological understanding of the crucifixion and resurrection is not as much like paying a ransom or a substitution, or somebody has to be punished and so Jesus is going to take it. But it's more like a hostage rescue situation, if that makes sense. It is that when Christ tasted of death, as the book of Hebrews says, it's not taste like just take a little bit, but I mean, took on the fullness. He came in the flesh. He died as a human being. He descended to hell to smash the gates of hell, and to defeat the devil, to set us free from the devil and from hell. And so knowing that death is not the final word,
Right.
it's that yeah, this horrible thing happened to Melinda, and this horrible thing happened to Tracy. And when they died, Jesus was there to meet them.
Yeah.
Because he entered into death fully to be there when we get there, and not to leave us there. The icon of the resurrection that we have at Easter it's one of my absolute favorites. So it's Jesus depicted standing on the gates of hell, and they're smashed down, but they're crossed over each other. So, whoops, let me hold up like,
Yeah.
so they're crossed over each other like a cross,
Uh-huh.
and Jesus is standing on top of the gates of hell,
Wow.
and the devil is smashed underneath it, crushed under the gates, and there are tombs to either side, and he's reaching out and pulling Adam out of one of them and Eve out of the other. And standing behind him, bearing witness, are the Old Testament prophets and John the Baptist, because remember, John was beheaded a few years before Jesus' crucifixion. But you have the Old Testament prophets and King David that are there bearing witness to who Christ is and to what he is doing in destroying the power of death. So bringing it around, as I say, I'm not applying it like a Band-Aid over a boil. I mean, death sucks.
Yeah.
And it's not what we were created for. And it hurts to grieve, but to know that there is hope. Really, the anger that I had to work with was just over some things that were unresolved bits. You know, Melinda and I had been married just over 2 years. We were starting to get to that point in marriage where you're getting real with each other. But in the mercies of God, the night before she died, we had had a little tiff on the phone. We were in the midst of trying to sell a house, and we'd had a little argument, but not a huge fight, but enough of an argument that when we hung up the phone, we were kind of huffy with each other. Or more, I was huffy with her. I was being difficult. But the next day, during a break in my class, I called her, and she almost didn't take the call. She had stepped out of her office, but she turned around, came back, took the call, and we apologized to each other and forgave each other for the night before, for the little argument we'd had on the phone. But when she died, there was nothing, no big stuff, nothing big and unresolved between us. When Tracy died, we were 18 years into marriage, and we had some stuff that we were still working on and hadn't yet resolved. And there were some things open for me that I was still kind of ticked off about. And I remember a time or two praying, but then also being angry and wanting to, and well, not just wanting, yelling at her.
Right.
It's like, how come we never settled this?
Yeah. Right.
Or I'm still mad at you for that. Or, that resolution will be there. There will be a day that, things will be resolved, and that's okay. But learning to let it go for now and not live in that place of anger.
Yeah. That's good.
Anger will poison joy.
Yes.
Anger will drag you to hell. I mean, it just will eat you alive.
Yeah.
And you can't stay there. And that's where counseling and also confession, both, because, yeah, I had things I was mad about, but I know Tracy had things she was mad about and that she didn't get resolved.
Yeah.
So, you know, I need to go to confession so that I can confess those things and get them out on the table and get them out of my soul and deal with those. So, yeah, I guess coming back around to your question about anger, yeah, there have been times of anger, but it's not really been with God. It was more working out these relationships, because for God, I'm so grateful for the hope that we have in Christ, that
100%.
you know, that's what makes the difference. The hymn that we sing at Easter, and we sang it over and over at Melinda's funeral, but the Orthodox Easter hymn is, Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death, and upon those in the tombs bestowing life. And
good.
to hang on to that is what God is doing for us.
Yes, that's
So
amazing.
yeah, and we will see the fullness of that one day.
Yes. So
Yeah.
where I see you today, you seem to be doing well, and I saw your blog called The Joyful Widower. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it.
And you seem joyful. So what is it? Because I know you've been widowed twice. You've had all this stuff happen, and what do you think it is, that's helped you?
Oh, Lord. As I say, it all comes. So in Orthodoxy, Pascha is the word for Easter. I mean, it's the Greek word for Easter. It comes from the word for Passover, because really Easter is the fullness of the Passover. Easter is the fullness. Holy Saturday is the fullness of the Sabbath. In the Old Testament, God created, and it says He rested on the Sabbath. Jesus rested on the Sabbath in the grave, but it was a rest that was redemptive. It was Him destroying the power of hell and the power of death. And so this hope that we have, and it's not just me and Jesus, but also the congregation, that is, at the risk of sounding flippant, but I think of it as Jesus with skin on Him.
Right.
Is what believers are supposed to be.
Yes.
And to have people around who show love and show support, who have been there for my kids and me through all this, who have been listening ears and provided meals, and just have been there to reach out and see how we're doing. I think also going through it a second time, in some ways, when you've been through it once, when you go through a second time, it's like, okay, this sucks, but I know what to do.
Yeah.
This time I'm doing it with kids. Yeah. So I know how to put my own oxygen mask on first, and then I can take care of my kids. I know what I need to do to take care of me. I know what I need to do to meet my needs so that I can take care of my kids' needs. Part of, I'd mentioned earlier, they're teenagers. They have their own friends. We would get to the end of the week, and I realized a few months in, Friday nights were my loneliest point of the week, because the kids get home from school. They're tired from the week of school. They just want to unplug and stare at a wall, or they want to talk to their friends, or they want to do. And so I would end up sitting on the couch feeling lonely and sulking and watching a lot of TV. And so finally I realized, okay, if Friday is my loneliest point of the week, then I need to do something about Friday nights. My kids need to meet their needs, so who do I turn to? I called a friend of mine at St. Anne's and said, hey, Friday nights are the loneliest point of my week. I know you like to play dominoes once or twice a month on a Friday night. If you got some time free, you want to meet up.
Perfect.
The email came back almost immediately.
Yeah,
and
people
so
want to help.
Exactly. So I've been meeting up with this friend of mine and his family. We've been friends for 30 years.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, a couple of times a month, we get together on a Friday night and play dominoes.
That's awesome.
My kids can take care, do what they need to do.
Yeah.
But I was able to find, reach out to a friend and say, this is what I need. And it meets their needs as well, too.
Right.
They enjoy having a friend over and having a game night. So, as I say, the hope we have in Christ,
yes,
and the body of Christ being there
Mm-hmm.
and meeting the needs, not just be ye warmed and filled,
Mm-hmm.
but like in the Epistle of James, it's you got to do more than just say God bless you and that's it.
Right.
But Jesus with skin on him, people who are there who
Mm-hmm.
are showing love and who are
Right.
doing the things that Jesus would do.
That's so good. And I think that's such a great example of not being afraid to ask for what you need. You reached
Yeah.
out to a friend, you knew what you needed, you reached out, and that need was filled. So many times
Yeah.
our friends are like, let me know if you need anything. And then we don't know what we need and we never tell them, but you recognized a need and you did
Yeah.
that. And it's such a good example. I have just a couple more questions. So you've been through this
Sure.
twice. What advice would you have for a new widow? We have a lot of new widows listening. When I say widow, I mean widow or widower. Someone widow.
Right. Totally
we use
understand.
the term the same. So
Gender inclusive.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
totally get it. Yeah. I mean, it's just when you've lost your person, it
Yeah.
sucks no matter what. Wow. I could really go on about that one for quite a while. But I'll
Yeah,
try to boil
just
it down
give
to
us
just a few
a few
things.
important things.
So first of all, just breathe and pray and remember that God is there, because so often we live our lives, we forget God, and taking the time to remember, it's not that, when we pray, come Holy Spirit, it's not that he's not there.
Right.
It's that we need to know he's there.
Yeah.
We need to remember the presence of God, that he is always there, even when we forget. So breathe and remember that God is there.
So good.
I would say check in with your physician,
Well, that's good.
because when you are grieving, you are going through some of the worst stress and the greatest duress that your body is ever going to go through.
Yep.
Grief is physical, it is emotional, and it is spiritual. You're going to be wrestling on all of those planes. And it is very important that you get in and see your doctor. This go round, I'm in my 50s. I met with my doctor a few days after Tracy died, and lo and behold, he had to double medication I was taking for heart rate and blood pressure because my
Wow.
blood
Yeah.
pressure was up.
Mm-hmm.
Go figure. The duress that you will be going through with grief, you may need adjustment to medications, or it may bring out a condition that you were borderline before, but the duress on your body is going to push you over the edge into that condition, with the stress and diet and I think cortisol, all the other things, not only blood pressure, but also my A1C kept going up in spite of best efforts. And it flipped me over to where the doctor said, okay, you're finally there. We have to put the diabetes tag on this.
Yeah.
So now I'm on the right medication, and it's brought my blood sugar where it needs to be. Thanks be to God. That has helped immensely. But yeah, I would say see your doctor, get a baseline on where your health is, and then check in periodically, because things may come up. It may take time to develop. And do that for your kids as well. I took my kids in to see their pediatrician after Tracy died, just to get a baseline, and also so that their doctor knew what they were going through, and it was in their chart, so that if they come in and they see a different doctor because their doctor is out that day, but it's noted in the chart, we're not having to go through everything all over again.
Yes.
The doctors are aware. So everyone in the family, medical professionals, need to know what you're dealing with. Nutrition and exercise is important.
Yes.
You will sleep better. I mean, sleep is going to be hard no matter what.
Yes.
Especially that first year, maybe 2 years. Sleep aids really don't help so much, because when you do finally quit them, I mean, I had, my doctor did write me a prescription for trazodone, which is pretty good. And I would take it just on an as needed basis. If I felt like, man, I'm feeling really rough tonight, but it took me 6 months to go through a 1 month bottle of trazodone because I didn't need it that often. But sleep is just going to be difficult.
Yes, it is.
Get exercise, eat properly. That will help some. It's not going to make it perfect. It's not going to work well, but it will work better than if you're just living on junk food and sitting around all the time.
Yeah. That's great advice.
Friends, especially if you're in a church, you need a worshiping community. This is part of Remember God, but also God has brought these people alongside you for a purpose, and it will bless them to bless you. Be patient and understanding, because you're going to have friends who will say stupid things.
Oh, yeah.
Or they mean well, or at best it's just from not knowing what you're going through.
Right.
At worst, it may just be total callousness. Like, what? It's been 6 months. Aren't you over this yet? Why are you still crying?
Right.
That sort of thing.
Yes.
Or grief hijacking. Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah.
My dog died. I know exactly how you feel. It's like, do you? Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, people are going to say dumb things.
They are. Yep.
But if you're ready for it, and if you can bring a spirit of forgiveness to the
yes,
table,
for sure,
instead of holding it with bitterness, if anything, you can just laugh at some of them. Just when you get away, especially if you have a widowed friend that you can say, you won't believe.
Right.
Yeah, any non-widowers or widows out there, anyone who's not walked this road, I will tell you, we widows get together and we talk about the dumb things that have been said,
true.
and we have a good laugh
we do.
over some of these things.
Yes.
So, we laugh at people who say dumb things.
So
but
true.
if we can do it with a spirit of charity, then it'll keep from eating you up inside.
Yeah.
So, just kind of be ready for that. And then finally, this was true for me both times. I don't know it's true for everyone, but I found this to be the case, and a few other widows have said yes to this as well. The first year is tough. You're going through the first of everything, but you're also operating out of shock. You're still, you have that numbness. You're trying to take it in. It's the second year that is harder than the first, was my experience, because you've gotten through the first of everything. You take a deep breath, but then you look ahead and realize, I got to do the second of everything. And you don't have the benefit of that numbness and shock anymore. You're now looking forward, and it hurts, and you see, I got to do this again. Yeah. And you get through it again. And that's where you realize it's a marathon and not a sprint.
That's good. Yeah.
That, I got to do it a second and a third time, and however many more times God has for me is how many more times I'm going to be doing this. And I need to pace myself. So I found the second year harder than the first. But when I got through the second year, it was sort of okay, I got through 2 years of this.
Right.
I can do this.
Yeah.
And you've also sorted out some things. You've figured out, you've adjusted and adapted, and you've learned. Grieving is a learning process. A really good book I read a year ago called The Grieving Brain by Dr. Mary Frances O'Connor. If you've heard of that one, it's a fantastic book. But she talks about grief as the emotions and the feelings, but grieving as that learning process and the adaptation that you go through as you're learning how your life is going to be different.
Right.
And the brain, it takes a while to learn. Your brain changes over time as you're learning things, but it takes that time. Getting through the second year and coming into the third, it feels different. And I feel like, okay, God, we've got this.
Yeah.
And for me, coming through the second year this time, and knowing, okay, not everyone's widowed twice. This is a bit rare, especially at my age. I mean, people who are widowed, they marry again, but they might be widowed a second time in their 70s.
Right.
I was in my early 50s when Tracy died. I was 29 when Melinda died. And both times it was sudden and unexpected.
Right.
Just out of the blue, a car wreck and a ruptured aneurysm. But when I passed the 2-year mark this time, it felt like things shifted a bit, but I also started praying, okay, God, I looked at the parable of the talents. You know, the servants, one was given 5 talents, another 2, another 1. And the one who was given 5 talents made 5 more and had, profit for his master from what he had earned. And so on through, down to the one servant who buried his 1 talent and said, here's your 1 talent, because I knew you were a hard man, and that, so here it is. And he was told, you foolish and unprofitable servant, you at least could have put it on deposit with the money lenders, and I would have had it with interest when I got back, instead of just what I had given you, and that was it. And so this time, back in February, I just started praying, okay, God, if this is what you've given me, then what are we going to do with it? It's like, and not just what am I going to do with it, or what are we going to do with it? Because ministry is, God's the one who gives the ministry. God gives the charge, but we're the ones who've got to get to work and do it. It's not just going to happen while we just sit there and stare at our navel. So, yeah, along about February, I had this sense of, okay, God, how are we going to use this? What are we going to do with this?
Yeah.
And the moment I started praying along those lines, the ideas just started flowing, and I started taking notes. I'd already started writing a blog, some ideas for a book, which that will still be quite a ways out. But speaking, doing some public speaking stuff came to mind. One thing I did, so seminarians, people who are training toward ministry, part of the program in most seminaries is that you have to do a unit of hospital chaplaincy. Oh. You've got to work in a hospital. Like I mentioned earlier, I did mine at Duke about 30 years ago, and it was an amazing experience. It was hard work. I mean, you're going into a hospital room where someone is dying,
right,
and you're there to talk with the family, pray with the patient, whatever needs there are. And you learn a lot in a hospital. We have a training program like that at a local hospital in Knoxville. I wrote to the director of the program in February, out of the blue, had never met him, just said, this is who I am. This is a little bit of my life story. I have a master's in divinity. I did a unit of clinical pastoral education at Duke. I remember the day we had a presentation about grief and bereavement and talked about it in a meeting with all the student chaplains. If you do that with your students, I'd be happy to volunteer any way that I could help. I had a reply within a day where he said, I would like to explore this idea. Let's meet for coffee. We met for coffee, talked for an hour or two, and he said, I'm really intrigued. I want to make this happen. And a couple weeks later, I had an email saying, I've got you slated for 3 one-hour sessions in June to meet with the chaplains. So I've had 2 meetings already.
Nice.
I have one more coming up this Wednesday to meet with people who are training toward ordained ministry, and to have the chance to share with them, this is what it's like to lose someone, to live with grief. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to need to know to support the family and to lead your congregation in supporting the family. You've got to have your resources together, because families have a lot of shakeup when someone comes into the family or someone leaves the family. And pastors are there for baptisms, for weddings, for funerals. When you have people coming in or going out, you've got that upheaval. The pastor has a unique in. Well, for a baptism, typically you're going to have several months lead time. For a wedding, you're going to have time. For a death, you might get 24 hours and you're planning a funeral. You got to have your resources lined up. You've got to know what you're doing. You may not have the luxury of time. And so my goal in this is to plant some seeds so that they can be ready. They can have resources in mind, know how to reach out to the family. I reached out to several groups I belong to on Facebook with widows and widowers and a few others, and just said, what would you say to a pastor? What do you wish you could have said to your pastor? What do you think they need to hear? What would be helpful? What are things that you would say to a pastor? Please don't do this.
Yeah.
And so far, I've gotten about 5 or 6 typewritten
Nice.
pages worth of responses. And most of it is just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
You don't have to explain it to me. I don't want theology.
Right.
I just want you to sit there and listen to me as I'm pouring out what I've got to say.
That's good.
So, yeah, these are just a few examples of some things that I feel like I said, God, what do we do with this? And it looks like he's got a list.
That's amazing.
So
And you're
I'm
here on this
excited to see where it
podcast.
goes.
So-
And here we are today, and I'm grateful for this opportunity, Michelle.
Yes.
I'm really glad that you reached out to me. And
Well, thank you.
I looked at your email and thought, oh, she doesn't know my story yet. We may go long.
That's all right.
There's a
No,
lot here.
There is a lot, and I think it's beautiful how you have used what you've been through to help other people. And one of the most touching things that you said, it brought me to tears, was when after Tracy died, that you were willing to let your kids go. You were thinking about them. And I was like, I don't know if I could have done that in the moment. My kids were younger than that. They didn't ask to go anywhere. But if they had asked, I don't know if I could have done that because I didn't want to be alone. I mean, my sister-in-laws came over too, but I just thought, what a sacrifice. What an amazing dad you are to put their needs first. And then in turn, you realized, oh, this is actually good. You can go to sleep and all the things you needed to do. But it was just so
well, even before I went to
beautiful.
sleep, just that I needed a good scream and cry.
Yes, that
I
too.
just needed to fall apart. I'd been up for 48 hours and I had to keep it together for all that time because
That's
I
so
had to
hard.
be the dad.
Yeah.
And it was that realization, someone else is taking care of my kids.
Yeah.
You know, I don't
turned
have to
out to
do
be-
everything.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah. And that's
Thank you, Michelle.
just a testament of who you are. And I just love hearing about your faith and what you believe and just how God.
I'm not perfect by any stretch.
Oh,
I've
none of
screwed
us
up many
are.
times as well.
None of us are, but it's just beautiful
Yeah.
to see.
Well,
that
I would
the-
also, if
Oh,
I
go ahead.
may,
Yes, please.
you would ask what I would share with other widows and
Yes.
widowers. And I will tell you, you're going to mess up and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to hurt your kids' feelings. And there are just going to be times and they're going to hurt your feelings. And forgiveness is crucial. You have to be willing to give forgiveness, and you got to be humble enough to ask for forgiveness. A lot of parents don't know how to say to their kids, please forgive me, I'm sorry, and not make an excuse. Say, I'm sorry, but
Yeah, no.
da 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 da. You know, there can be no buts on that. We parents have a hard time sometimes just saying, I screwed up, I'm sorry, I hurt you badly, and I wish I could take it back, but I can't. And all I can do is ask you to forgive me. If you can do that with your kids, that will go such a long way to helping you all heal.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. Such great
So
advice.
I didn't want to sound like I'm a saint
No,
because
no.
I have my share of mess ups and screw ups as
Yes,
well.
we all do. We're all just learning it one day at a time and
Yeah,
grieving. Yeah, you're learning how to do it. So, wow,
it is learning.
what an amazing story, and I'm excited to watch like where God takes you next. And where can they find you if they want to connect with you?
All
What's
right.
a good place?
Probably the best place would be through my blog, thejoyfulwidower.com.
Okay, I'll put a link to.
Yeah. I'm kind of intermittent in my writing. I write maybe every month or two, something like that. But there is an email me
Oh,
link.
perfect.
There on the blog site. So
Okay,
I will
great.
get emails through that. And I'll post as things come about. I've talked with one or two priests who have expressed interest in doing maybe like a Saturday workshop or a parish retreat to talk about grief and bereavement.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm willing to go just about anywhere. It doesn't have to be an Orthodox church because the thing is, grief is universal.
Yes.
It doesn't matter who you are. We're all going to die. We're all going to have loved ones who died. And we're all going to have sadness. And we're all going to have sorrow. And we're all going to have stuff we got to work through. And we're all going to have needs, like meals. And we're going to need someone who will come along and help out with the quotidian BS, as a friend of mine recently put it, just the day-to-day drudgery stuff that's
Yeah.
got to get done, and to have someone who can come alongside you makes all the difference. So, and that knows whoever you are, Christian or no, grief is real.
It is.
And if I can help anyone with finding their way forward, as I say, I'm open to come to just about any church really, and share my story, share anything I've learned about just how to find your way forward and how to be a congregation that supports someone who's grieving.
So good.
I do want to make a plug. I know we've gone quite a while, but I want to make a
fine.
plug for an organization that's local to Knoxville that I don't know there's anything else like this anywhere, and I'm hoping that maybe it can be replicated in the future. There's an organization here called the Widowed Parent Relief Project. And the website, if you want to put that in the show notes, it's wprp.org. Widowed Parent Relief Project. So our founder, Kelly Orico is her name. Kelly suffered a massive stroke at age 39 and survived it miraculously. She has 4 children. They were young teenagers at the time of her stroke. And as she was recovering and praying through, God, first of all, what would it have been like had she died and her husband been left with 4 teenagers to raise? But out of that grew her vision, the more she prayed about it, for this organization. So what WPRP does, we have volunteers who are trained to come alongside a widowed family as what we call a family friend. These volunteers agree to walk with the surviving parent for a year.
Wow.
They keep in touch with them. They meet in person at least once a month. The parent can communicate to them any needs that they have, and they can bring those back to the board. And we try to find how can we fulfill those needs. One example, there was someone that the deck was falling apart on the back of their house. We managed to get their deck replaced.
Awesome.
So this is meeting real needs. We provide professional house cleaning services twice a month.
Wow.
So professional cleaners come out and clean the house. The family is also provided with a set number of hours with a professional home organizer who comes in
That's amazing.
and helps to sort through things and organize the house to reduce clutter and help just bring some peace to the family, because the less clutter you have, the more mentally you feel able to deal with things.
Yes.
We have a roster of babysitters who are background checked.
Wow, that's amazing.
We have a roster of drivers because, a solo parent, they may be at work and not able to get their kids somewhere. We have drivers who
That's
are
so
available
great.
to help out with driving services.
Wow.
So the whole vision and goal of WPRP is to provide at least a year of helping the surviving parent get their feet back on the ground and get things together for their family to be able to move forward in a healthy manner.
That's amazing.
Because part of Kelly's research in forming the organization was the number one predictor for how well kids adapt to the death of a parent. The number one predictor is how well did the surviving parent adapt to the loss.
Wow.
So if we can help the parent,
Right.
we're helping the
That's
kids
amazing.
and we're helping the family as a whole. So definitely check out WPRP, go to the website and read about them. It's just a marvelous organization. We recently took on, I think, our 26th family.
Wow.
And the organization has been around for just 3 years or so now. So,
That's so
it's
amazing.
meeting a real need
Yes.
in the Knoxville area and the surrounding
That's
counties.
so great.
Yeah, I've been so blessed to volunteer with WPRP and just some good folks who are working with this. And our hope is that if this model works really well, that maybe we could replicate it to other cities and
Such
be able
a
to
great
provide
idea.
for widows and widowers.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
It reminds
I just wanted
me,
to share that.
No, thank you. And we'll have a link. We did an episode with Natalie, I'm going to not say her last name, Knutson, something like that. She has an organization in Dallas called Broken Halos Haven, where they let widows or widowers come stay at
Hmm.
this house for free, with their kids.
Oh,
And
wow.
then they also have this thing called Honey Dudes, and it's like a
Okay.
honey-do list. So widows or widowers can go and like go on this website and put in what they need done around the house, and then somebody volunteers. The honey dude comes and does it.
Oh,
And
wow.
then
That's
they
awesome.
also have, oh, I'm going to forget the name of it, Man Camp. And what that is men who volunteer to mentor the kids, the boys. Like I just saw she posted
Wow.
something about they're going to learn all about cars. And like they teach
Okay.
them things that their dads would have done with them. And
Oh,
that
wow. That's
started,
awesome.
yeah, it's amazing. She said that started because somebody, like a kid was trying to mow the lawn, and this guy rolled down his window, was like, "Didn't your dad teach you how to mow? You're not doing it right." And he's like, "My
Oh,
dad died."
ouch.
And so they took that, the mom
Ouch.
took that and decided to start this organization, or somehow
Wow.
that's part of their story. And so I thought that was beautiful. So I love, it's like a very similar vision to what you guys are doing, all the things that they're doing. So it's
We
cool
got
to
to network all these
yes,
organizations.
yeah, because I meet all of these people from all over that do. That's a great idea. We should have some network. So it's like, okay, if you're from here, we have this. If you're from here, we have this.
Hmm.
And as you run into families, just know that she takes families from. I'll get you her information because it doesn't matter where they
Okay.
live. They can come stay in the house in Dallas for free, like with them and their kids. And it's just
Wow.
this beautiful thing. And then they have the registry where they have
Hmm.
somebody, like a family friend helps like get the word out to buy, like, oh, here's a pass to the museum, like a pass to the zoo, a pass to this. And so then when they
Hmm.
go, everything's already paid for. And so I
Oh,
think
wow.
that's beautiful. So as you run into families, they could also go to Dallas and be part of this. So yes, definitely
That is
need to get
fantastic.
all of these organizations together that are doing such amazing things. So
Yeah. Yeah.
anyways, wow.
It's funny you say man camp because so a couple of years ago I went on a retreat with Refuge Widowers,
I've
which is
heard of
based
that
out of
one.
Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was an amazing couple of days. But when I told my kids I was going, my son immediately said, "Can I go?" And I said, "Sorry, son. This is just for the widowers, just
Yeah.
for the dads." But I jokingly referred to it as man camp
Oh, funny. Yeah,
because
that's
I
what
was going
they
to be going with the dads.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what they call it. And she always puts out, I follow her on Facebook and see she puts out all these things, that they're doing. And I think it's just beautiful because they don't have their dad there to teach them. And so
Yeah.
it's been
Oh,
amazing.
wow. That is
I
awesome.
know. I'm like, what a great thing, so maybe that's something you guys could incorporate too. Like just another
Yeah.
thought.
We're starting conversations and we're starting some work on that actually with WPRP. We've got a couple of volunteers, guys who, in fact, we had an event recently for the widows. They got facials, but there were
Nice.
3 or 4 of us guys who came together and we provided the childcare services
Awesome.
while the moms were getting facials. So we had about 8 or 9 kids that we
That's
were
so
running
fun.
herd on in the playground during that couple of hours. So we're starting to scratch the surface on that and look at how we can provide, because most of the families we have with WPRP are widows.
Yeah.
We've had 1 or 2 widowers, but it's mostly widows. So
Yes.
these are going to be kids who don't have dad
Yep.
around. So we've been trying to think, how can we be intentional and provide some strong male figures to spend time with the kids.
Yeah. So she might be a great
yeah,
resource to see how they do theirs and get
yeah, especially being able to share notes and,
Yes,
and compare
exactly.
and things. And yeah, there's just so many opportunities coming about. There's one that I'm hoping come to fruition. I've started talking with an Orthodox palliative care chaplain in Boston about doing retreats for widows and widowers, but within the Orthodox Church, where we can bring the prayers and the traditions and the things that
Yeah.
we do to the table and do something a little bit like what Refuge does. And I talked with the founder of Refuge, and I was kind of apprehensive at first. It's like, I don't want to steal your thunder, but I've had this idea, and he was absolutely go for it.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. So,
So great.
yeah, I'm grateful that, especially with the internet, all of these opportunities, podcasts. Again, Michelle, I'm so grateful that you invited me to come
Thank
on.
you.
Just that we're able to use the internet for good,
Yes.
for once,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
and put all these resources together and find ways to meet needs.
Yes, it is.
And
Well,
just
yeah.
glory to God for all of
That's
this.
right. Thank you. Well, I'm going to close this out in prayer. So,
All right.
God, I just thank you for Jim and just how he is making beauty from the ashes, and you are making that and you're giving that to him. And we just pray for all of these opportunities as he steps into them, that you'll continue to get the glory and continue to let him help other people grow closer to you. God, we pray for Mark right now. We pray for continued 100% healing for his body. We pray against his anxiety that he's been having, and we just pray for clarity and strength. We pray for Tina as she supports him, and for the kids, and that he'll be back on soon. And we just thank you for each one of the listeners. They are not here by accident, and I just pray that you lead and guide them where you want them to go. And we just thank you for this opportunity. Amen.
Thank you, Lord.
Well, if you
Amen.
liked this podcast, give it a little bing, 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen. Please join our Widow Too Soon Facebook page. We have 2 pages. We have the big one, and then we have a smaller one, which, Jim, I'm not sure if you're part of this one, maybe. It's called Widow Too Soon Community, and there's only 149 people, and it's much more interactive. Because on
I will check Facebook after I leave.
Because on this one, so we started the other one, like 3 years ago when we started this, and that's probably where you found us. But you can only post, but with the community, with a group, other people can post. So I'm loving that other people are posting like, hey, today's my anniversary, it's a hard day, or whatever. And so it's not just us posting anymore. And so it does feel like a community. So I will have the links below. Please join the community if you have not. We're also on Instagram, TikTok, all the places. So thanks again for being here, and we will see you next time. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Michelle.